What's up, y'all? This is Apollo. We back for another episode of the Bigger Than Food podcast. This is episode number 4. Now, I'm excited about this conversation because we're going to have a deep conversation, a fun conversation with, to me, in my opinion, he represents the next generation of chefs in our state. We were talking offline, and we're talking about how we have all this talent in our state and people don't know about it. But in this conversation, we're going to talk about his experience, his influences, his background, what he loves, what's coming next. So episode 4 is about Chef Gabriel Lewis. Now, I want to say the name again because I need you to remember this name. But before we bring him on, I'm going to give you a teaser of why you should know who Chef Gabriel Lewis is. You've probably seen him on a couple of pretty famous shows, but we're going to bring it back, and I'm going to remind you who Chef Gabriel Lewis is.
And candy that bacon around that tenderloin. My name is Gabriel Lewis, and I have been operating as a private chef in Oklahoma City for about the past 7 years. I got into the kitchen, I'd say about 9 or 10 years old. My mother, my grandmother, my aunt were always just very food-centric, large gatherings, large sums of food, and it just made everyone in that community happy.
There's one amateur home cook here who is far beyond the other 3. Gabriel, please, take that apron.
Thank you, Chef. Being on MasterChef was a very, very challenging, but a very exciting experience. Being able to see what it's like to cook under pressure, to cook in front of Michelin-starred chefs, really push and test the limits of what you're capable of coming up with in the moment.
Young man, it's very rare we see such raw talent come through this competition. So I am personally going to send you to culinary school.
When I really registered what was going on, it just kind of made me euphoric. I was super happy, super excited, overwhelmed, and just very, very grateful.
So welcome to episode 4 of the Bigger Than Food podcast. Is the Chef Gabriel Lewis, y'all. If I had a sound effect, I'd do it right now, but I'm still testing the podcast equipment, and I don't want to mess it up. So welcome Chef Gabriel Lewis to the show. We're going to call him Chef Gabe for short. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 4 of Bigger Food Podcast, man.
Oh, man, happy to be here.
So let's dive into it, man. Like, we are both two people who love food and are passionate about food and how food influences our environments and our world. For the people who don't know who you are, give us some background. Like, where are you from? What made you excited? Like, why food? Like, tell people where you're from.
Absolutely. So born and raised Oklahoma City, if you want to take it a little bit more detailed, from Spencer, Oklahoma. Most of my family is kind of Spencer Jones area. I got into food probably around, the ages of 9 to 11. My mother, my grandmother, my aunt, super food centric, loved to cook on the holidays. My grandmother would make sure like every one of her kids and some of her grandkids had a dish there that they loved. And so she would always have these big spreads, and they've only gotten bigger as she's gotten older. And that kind of inspired me to step in the kitchen because I was always on the side of eating, and I want to be able to create that memory for people. And, food has the ability to create an experience and a memory that you can just go back to and revisit and experience all over again as soon as those smells hit your nose or those flavors hit your tongue. And so that kind of gave me the inspiration to step into the kitchen. And I learned a different part of what I applied to my food from my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, from the versatility to, what you question to, I'm making food just to survive type of thing. And so I took all 3 of those, bound together, and that's kind of the fire that got lit that, sent me into the kitchen.
Yeah. So it's similar experience. Like my mom and my aunt, my mom and my grandmother are big influences. My mom, and I tell the story a lot, my mom is one of 12 kids. I am one of 47 grandkids. The last I counted, I'm pretty sure there are probably more out there. So my grandmother cooked 3 times a day until she couldn't stand up anymore, just having back problems. And on her birth certificate, she had on her as her occupation domestic servant.
Wow.
When she passed away, it still said domestic servant. And I bring that out because of the influence of what she had in terms of cooking and preparing. I remember when she would make these dishes, she had garlic powder, onion powder, may had some all season, add some black pepper. But for whatever reason, there's all these flavors that come out, these like 4 ingredients that she made. And we didn't go grocery shopping as much. And as I'm following you, I read that you talk a lot about the influence of your mother, your aunt, your grandmother, and all that. So as growing up, what did they do? What did you observe as a young child? I guess, I was the kid that licked the spoon. Grandma made the cake. I'm the one licking the spoon. That's me. But what was it about the kitchen now being a trained chef? Like, what was it about the kitchen that drew you in there as growing up as a young person?
Sometimes I like to compare it to almost like an orchestra or symphony where, sometimes it's you focus on one instrument, you become proficient in that one instrument. And then there's times where, you want to dabble in other things, or you may just want to, be the conductor and you want to conduct the entire show. And for me, I was watching, my mother frying chicken while she's, cooking some mashed potatoes, or she might be baking something in the oven, some pies or something like that. And so she had 3 or 4 things going at the same time. And I never understood how in the world are you able to conduct this way? And my grandmother was even more so, she'd spend an entire week cooking. And I'm thinking, how are you making food to feed an army in a kitchen that's built for, the feeding of a 3 to 5 person family? And so it was always kind of one of those things where I looked at my grandmother for the bulk cooking, my mother for the multitasking, and my aunt for the simple soul of what she did. My aunt was one of the people that just cooked to live. She didn't cook with any passion. She said, I know how to do a little bit of something. And she would make, and still is, probably some of the best fried chicken I've ever had in my life. And it was breakfast for me. My aunt would cook me fried chicken for breakfast, and it was one of the best things. And, seeing that, there wasn't any restriction or rule when it came to her, when it came to food. It was, we're going to cook whatever I'm going to cook. If you have a stewed fried chicken in the breakfast for the morning, that's what you're having. If you're having a soda with it, so be it. And so it was learning to break the rules from her, learning to be versatile and a multitasker from both my grandmother and my mother. So they each imparted something in me that really kind of made me question, do I just want to cook, or do I want to be a chef? And I think that those 3 components led to me deciding that I want to be the person, conducting the whole symphony, as opposed to just being some, one part of it.
So you said something interesting. You said, at what point do you remember, where was the moment where you said, I just don't want to cook, I want to be a chef, I want to create things? Do you remember that moment?
Oh,
and
yeah.
how young you were when that happened? I
had to been, if I'm not mistaken, 9 or 10 years old. And I'm just sitting here watching my mother cook for my brother's birthday. And, his thing is he loved thin cut fried pork chops, mashed potatoes, fried okra, and anything with garlic on it. And that was kind of his thing. It's very simple, but my mother would just whip it up immediately, and it was like there was no thought to it. She just did it. She had several pans going. She's got this 350-degree grease sitting in this cast iron skillet. She's just making these things happen, all while singing and having a good time. And it was in that moment that kind of hit me, where I decided that that's what I want to do for people, not just people I love, but the people I have no idea, who they are, what they do. It doesn't matter. I want to be able to give them that same level of excitement and love that my mother was able to give to my brother on his birthday and our birthdays respectively. So it was the moment that I watched her spread joy that way with food that it kind of, it just solidified everything for me.
So what role did, having those powerful influences of food and watching the reactions that it gave people when they ate it, even your reactions, what do you think was the role that food played in your family dynamic?
Oh, it's still really, really big. We don't gather if there's not food, essentially. Like, if we're not cooking, we're going somewhere where there's food. Food is the central player when it comes to the bringing together and gathering of family and friends. So it still plays a central role as a binder for us. If you're talking food, you're talking about it's the egg, it's the breadcrumb and the meatloaf. It brings it together, it's going to crumble apart. And so we all unify around food. Typically speaking, I'm the one cooking it, but it's the universal unifier. It's the universal language for people. Even if they don't like each other, they'll probably still go to grandma's for a plate. They might time it out different, but they're still going to go. And so it plays that role of the glue for my family.
When did you start feeling the pressure of, now that you are, now Gabe is a chef? Before going to culinary school, like, when did you start feeling like you had this responsibility to cook now, because you fell into this role of, well, since Gabe likes to cook, well, baby, you go ahead and do this? And when did you start feeling this pressure that you had to think about, like, okay, now I got to make the macaroni and cheese, and grandma does it this way, or auntie does it that way, like, but I'm gonna do it my way? Like, do you remember when you felt that that moment where it was you moved into the place of I am crowned or given this I guess like magic feeling of I am the person that's preparing. Do you remember that time when that happened?
Honestly, it started, the first instance of that was, I want to say when I was 12 years old. My dad had a very, very severe stroke. And so to the point where it was physically debilitating enough where he had to relearn how to walk, how to drive, how to write, whole thing. And so my mother spent all of her time taking care of him. And so I felt like the best thing that I could do was help take care of her and whoever else by cooking the meals instead of her having to worry about, juggling everything. And so that was the first jumping off point at that. And I think, the next one that really solidified it for me was just watching the people that taught me and the people that, raised me. I could notice the times where they're aging. You could see somebody physically slowing down. You could see where, cooking 5 to 7 things at a time becomes a little bit more exhausting for them. And they got to go sit down a little bit more. Or, peeling the potatoes takes twice as long, or, stewing the greens or picking the greens takes a lot longer. That kind of rang with me with, my grandmother's not going to be here forever. My mother's not going to be here forever. So I probably need to spend as much time as I can with them and then take as many tasks as I can off of them. And so I started asking around probably 14, 15, like, hey, what can I make? What can I make? What can I make? Mm-hmm. And, grandmothers are very stern about, well, we got a certain way to make things. So if you don't know exactly how to make it, you're not making it. You can help them learn, but you're not going to be responsible solely.
Right.
So I had to earn that privilege. But the responsibility of it happened around 14 to 15.
Okay. It's definitely interesting. Like and it's, when you break down like the role that food plays, it is not just in whether it's Black families or Hispanic, just different types of family groups, the role that food plays, because it communicates different messages. It communicates love. It communicates maybe there's some peace or reconciliation need to happen. It communicates serving. It communicates a lot of different languages when you involve food, especially when, there's a matriarch or patriarch that might be experiencing something in their life. And so I remember this moment when my grandfather passed away. I was 9 years old, and my grandmother would go, I would occasionally go with her to some families that she would clean, a house she would clean. And I remember one house I went to, she was like, don't touch this, don't touch that. And I was like, man, it's a nice house. Like, it's a nice side of town. And I didn't get it. But then when my grandfather passed away, all these cars showed up. So in Duncan, we live on the hill. So that's where she lived, on the hill. That's where the Black folks lived. And across the street was Douglas School. And so all these cars were showing up. And as a kid, I used to get mad when these cars of white people would show up because we would never see them. They never come hang out. And my grandma would always give them food. And I didn't get it. But then when my grandfather passed away, they brought food to her. And that was like the start where I realized, like, wait a minute, like my grandmother did this thing that we love so much. Probably selfishly, we were like, why are you giving our food away? But it became this bridge builder between people. And then even after she passed away, we have these connections. It was because I remember your grandmother made this pie, or she makes greens a certain kind of way, or she made this lemon icing and she just used like lemon juice and powdered sugar. And I was like, how does she do all this? It was really amazing to see how food binds and bonds. But I want to fast forward to the moment where you said, you know what? I am going to culinary school. I want to compete. What made you, knowing how maybe being in the kitchen space, you knew how tough it was. Did you get involved in at local tech centers or places to learn different techniques before you went off to culinary school?
Absolutely. I was one of those kids that when I figured out what I wanted to do, I was like a dog with a bone. I wasn't leaving it alone. So it wasn't maybe I'm swayed one way, maybe I'm swayed the other way. Maybe I want to, go to, become a paralegal, or, I didn't have any of those, the secondary, tertiary plans. It was one and only, that's what I'm doing. Now, how can I do it? And so I was 12, 13 years old, Googling, cooking classes for preteens and this, that, and the other, and couldn't find anything. So when I was in high school, it was my sophomore year, Francis Tuttle came to Putnam City North, and they said, hey, we have a culinary division, and we built a whole new lab. And it took, I think, probably 3 seconds after they said that, and I was already looking for the sign-up sheet.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'd love to go take a tour. Didn't end up taking a tour. I just signed up for it. And lo and behold, I was on a waiting list. And I'm like, oh, well, this sucks. Maybe I'm not going to make it in. And it was probably a week before classes started that I had my acceptance, and was so excited. And I just kind of jumped at it. And that was how I went about that entire, I think it was 2-year process. Was every day I went into class, I was just hungry. I was ready. I'm sitting there, I'm paying attention. I've got my notepads. If they're giving me recipes, they're giving me to-do lists, we're doing our checklist for our equipment. I'm kind of taking stock of everything. And that was probably one of the experiences that I heavily relied on and still do. I tell people all the time that 2 years is where I learned a lot of my fundamentals. That's where I learned a lot of, how to square my shoulders up, how to cut, how to multitask, how to understand that time-sensitive tasks need to be organized in your mind. If you can't do it in your mind, do it on a slate, but whatever it is, if you're going to make a dinner, you need to understand what's going to take the longest to what takes the least. And so timing out your food, understanding the nuances of heat and seasoning, a lot of those things came into play at Francis Tuttle. And so, I definitely credit a lot to my vocation, because they are the ones that really kind of set me on a more organized path.
So what did your maybe your friends or family thought when you were like, I'm going to Francis Tuttle to be a chef?
It was a no-brainer. They were like, yeah, okay, figured. My brother, my third eldest brother, had gone to Metro Tech, and my second eldest had gone to Francis Tuttle. I don't remember what the vocation was for, but they both went to tech schools. And so it wasn't a stretch for me to go. But when I said I want to do it and I want to go cook, my mother was really happy about it. My dad was like, well, you do cook well anyway, so might as well go for it.
You know how dads do. They're like, okay. That's what you want to do. Go ahead.
It's like, that's what makes you happy, man. Go for it. But, I just want to make sure that whatever you do it to the fullest. You do it the way that you need to do it. My dad was, he owned restaurants back in the 90s. He owned, I think, he worked for a Steak and Ale, owned a Sonic. And so he was already familiar with the dynamic of sit down versus fast.
Wait. You went too fast on that one. Okay. So your dad was a restaurant owner as well?
Yes. He owned a Sonic. It's actually where he met my mother, funny enough. So
wait a minute. So, okay. All right. Wait. So your dad owned the franchise, or it wasn't a franchise. He owned the Sonic.
Yeah, it was a franchise store.
Okay, so he owned the franchise store. Okay, now I got other questions. So now it's starting to click in terms of like discipline and like giving it your best, because being an entrepreneur isn't easy to be an entrepreneur. So how was it for you watching your dad own this business?
So I believe they sold it not too long after I was born, but he'd owned several others afterward. It just wasn't in the food space. So my dad he's been a mortgage broker. He's owned, a building cleaning service. He's owned a liquor store. So I did watch those businesses and what he did within those businesses, and how he had to work and be, persistent in those. And one of the biggest lessons I took from that was my dad telling me, you don't have to know everything. Just know how to get the people that know. And it didn't click for me until he said, son, I didn't know how to clean a building. I didn't understand anything about the equipment. I hired somebody that did. They taught me. He's like, I was paying them and they were teaching me. And so it was symbiotic. And that's something that I take into business now. You don't know it, get with the people that do. And if the people that are there that are teaching you that, do well by them. And so that's something that he embodied quite a bit.
That's an amazing lesson learned. And I think that's the beauty of being being close to people who take risks. That's what entrepreneurs do. They take risks, take high risk, but you had a chance to be around and witness the work ethic required. And it makes sense when you said earlier, he said, if that's what you want to do, do it. Because that's the mindset that he had to have of doing all these different things and creating these different skills. So, and from what I understand, being a chef, it's managing people, it's inventory, it's accounting, it's flavors, it's a constant learning process. So you are like your own type of entrepreneur. Well, you are an entrepreneur in a business and a brand. So you said your brother went to tech school, Metro Tech. You went to Francis Tuttle. How valuable do you, because there's not a lot of talk about trade schools. When I was coming up, I mean, it was, you got to go to a 4-year university and I'm in a lot of debt from student loan debts from university, but there wasn't a lot of talk about trade schools or getting a trade or tech schools. What would you say is the value of going to a trade school or tech school? What have you seen from your experience, how valuable that played in your career?
For me, it reinforced all the lessons I learned early on about having a strict work ethic. You know, they are very about, you know, being prompt, being on time. Your uniform, as you know, in the culinary side, there's no dirty aprons, there's no wrinkled jackets, there are no regular shoes, you know, no extemporaneous facial hair. Everything needs to be, you know, trimmed down, prim and proper, ready. Fingernails trimmed down. There is no excuse for an unfit uniform or a tardy. And so it taught you to be prompt, to be on time. And if not, you're going to be reprimanded for that. You know, even if we had our jackets were a little bit wrinkled, we're like, oh, we're here. And they're like, yep, go to laundry, iron it or go home. And so it was one of those things that taught me, you know, show up on time, but show up ready. Don't show up looking unkept. You need to make sure that you're presenting yourself as a professional. And that was one of the bigger, you know, big lessons. They also taught us how to write resumes. They taught us, you know, what an education that's tailored to the student really looks like. You know, the curriculum may have been a little bit more broad as far as what they had considered at the beginning of the term, but as they learned their students, they altered course and they would give tasks to specific students. So, you know, if a student, for example, is having a hard time in baking class understanding yeast doughs, they're going to be making a yeast dough for the next 2 weeks until they understand it, until they understand the nuances of the moisture of the dough, you know, when to proof it, how long it needs to proof. You know, if they didn't understand in garde manger, you know, how to do these dressings or these cold salads or how to do a composed salad, that's what they're going to be working on. Understanding, you know, if they're throwing away too much food, they're going to be the team that's going to say, okay, you only have these ingredients. Now you're going to make the most of what you can do with that ingredient that day.
So could you see yourself making, as you're going through culinary school, making this connection back to watching like your mom, your aunt, and grandmother in the kitchen?
Oh yeah, and it connected and it also combated. And my mother was very annoyed with me at one point because I was trying to correct her, like, Mom, you're not cutting right, your fingers, boom, boom, boom. You're not, you know, cleaning up as you go. You're being messy. And it got to the point where she just said, "You need to get out of my kitchen." So I understand you go to school, but know-it-alls don't make life happen. So go on somewhere.
Right. Right. This is my kitchen. I do it how I want to. I was supportive of your journey. This is my kitchen. Oh, that's awesome. So I met you before I knew about your journey on MasterChef. And there are a few people watching that when I posted that I was interviewing you, were like, oh yeah, I know him. Like, you know, he's the man. And I was like, okay, well, there are people know about him and more folks should know. So many people are probably being reintroduced to you. But before we go on, there was a question in the chat that says, do you go back and teach at Francis Tuttle on occasion?
So it's funny enough. I have a board seat for the culinary side of Francis Tuttle, and so we have board meetings, you know, twice a year. And we just had one last Monday, and that was one of the topics of discussion was, you know, guest lectures. And so I definitely volunteered to do a guest lecture and bring in some other MasterChef contestants to do so as well. But I haven't yet. I do go back to the students and I will, you know, cherry pick students for events that I have coming up. I'll let them do a sign up sheet and say, hey, I need, you know, this many people. This is what the task at hand is going to be, paid or unpaid. This is what you're going to be learning. These are the people you're going to be working with, or the people that you're going to be cooking for. And so I like to go back and give the opportunities to the students, because I know as a student, I loved having any opportunity for extemporaneous learning outside of the curriculum. So I go back to offer the opportunities, and in the future, I'll be going back to do guest lectures.
Well, I mean, that's still teaching, right? You're creating an opportunity for people to learn. They're still getting real life experience. So it's great that you're doing that. It's, you know, I think for people to have that like servant type of attitude, that even though, you know, you're making your way, you're making a way and doing things that for your career, you're finding time to give back. It's kind of what we talked about a bit offline. it's people get surprised when you tell them that you are from Oklahoma City or you're from Oklahoma. And we, as a state, as a people, we don't brag about what we do until you start talking about OU Texas, and it's a whole nother type of conversation, or Bedlam, OUSU football games. So as you started like making the way and, you know, showing that you're talented and you have this special gift, how did people respond to you when you were getting your groove? Like, how were people responding to you? Like, wait a minute, like, you're from where? You're from Spencer? You're from Oklahoma City? Like, how are people responding to this, you being this talented chef up and coming?
It's always a different response, you know, when it's people that live in the state, you know, that I'm cooking for, and they say, well, where are you from? Like, what state are you from? And I tell them, like, Oklahoma, born and raised. Favorite thing to tell people is I was born at Baptist Integris. My first 2 jobs were right across the street. And so when people hear that, when they're local, they get a sense of pride. They get excited. You know, they're like, I'm glad you're one of us. Like, you're here. We you know, we stick together. We're Okies. I'm like, yes, absolutely. When I'm in different states, it's always almost like a, let me guess, and they're always wrong.
Yeah.
So when I tell them I'm from Oklahoma, and they go, how do you know how to cook salmon?
In a landlocked state?
Yeah. I said, well, I taught myself a lot of stuff. And then there's some things that I looked up, and there's certain things that, you know, the science of food will teach you if you just read it by the book and then exercise that information or knowledge in the kitchen. So I was like, I pull information from different sources, but it's always a different reaction. But a lot of the time it's usually so is there just a bunch of horses and cowboys? And they have a picture of the Old West. Like we're
right.
This whole, they pretty much think we're Gunsmoke. Like that's what they see.
Yeah.
You know, they see, as my grandma would say, the cowboy pictures. That's what they see as Oklahoma. And so I have to explain to them that all the states age and grow as time goes on,
right,
as, you know, wherever they're living. So it's usually a shock and awe, though.
Yeah. And I also see that as an opportunity to surprise people too. Something like you're a little bit underestimated, and then it's like, wait a minute, you didn't pay attention enough, because here I come with the hammer. Like you didn't pay attention enough at all. Well, so okay, let's switch to MasterChef, the MasterChef competition, because there's you made some comments about travel and going different places, and I want to answer those after the MasterChef introduction. What made you, now talking to you, I can understand why you would be confident and bold enough to say, I'm going to enter into this competition. But what made you say, I'm going to enter? Like, did you see it? Was it like a Gordon Ramsay thing? You were like, you know what, I can do this. Did someone encourage you to do it? What made you say, I'm going to enter into this competition? Not once, but twice.
So first go around, MasterChef was my show. That was my go-to from the first episode up to that point. That was my favorite show to watch every summer. You know, I was waiting for the last week in May until MasterChef would come on, and I loved watching all the audition rounds. It was to the point where I would watch them on a tablet in class while I'm supposed to be typing on a keyboard, and my teacher coming around and saying, turn that off. So I was a huge MasterChef fan. My sister was going through Craigslist, and she was looking at, I don't know, I think it was like photography equipment or gigs or something like that. And she messages me and says, hey, I don't know if this is real, but it says MasterChef open call. And I'm thinking it's probably a scam. And so I go check their website, and lo and behold, it's real. And so I immediately said, I've got to do it. Like there's no way, y'all. This is the first time they've come to Oklahoma, and so far the only time they've come to Oklahoma. And I said, I've got to do it. And so
what year was that?
That was 2016.
Okay.
So I was not even a full year out of high school yet. It was 10 months out of high school. And I just wanted to do it. You know, I was working at Chipotle. I felt like that I was already on the long track of having worked my way from dishwasher to, you know, line cook. So I figured, well, why not? What do I have to lose if they say no? You know, what do I have to gain? I have a lot of knowledge to gain if they say no or yes. So I might as well do it.
Did you tell your manager at Chipotle?
I told them what I was going to do. And the first day they were super excited, supportive. When I told them that I was asked back for an on-camera interview the next day and I was supposed to work Sunday shift, it was more of a, well, we need you in the building. And I pretty much told her, I said, well, it's either I go or I quit.
Right. Like,
yeah, it was.
I'm out.
It's like, I'm not really asking. I'm pretty much telling you I won't be there. Maybe I'll be there really late, but I won't be there when you need me to be there, because one is a job, one's an opportunity. I'm going to take the opportunity, because a job is a job I can go back to. And luckily, as this flower kind of started to bloom in this opportunity, they were very open and willing because they saw that I was gaining a little traction.
Yeah.
And like, hey, Gabe, if you need to take off for this, this, and this, whatever, if you end up going, your job's waiting on you when you come back, like whatever you need to do, we're going to support it. And that was kind of the mission while I was at Chipotle. That was also the culture of the people that worked there at the time. So honestly, they gave me a little bit more leeway after I was a little bit more stern. And so.
All right, let's back up. I feel like, you're missing some moments. You're not really digging into like your mindset. Like it's the first one. So there was season 8.
Yep.
Season 8. First time, you are preparing yourself to go to this open casting call. Where was it at? Were there a lot of people? Did you see folks you recognize? Like, what was that like as you're getting ready to go into this open call?
So surprisingly, I didn't see anyone I knew. It was over 300 people that showed up that day. I know that they said the open pool for that year was over 30,000. And so they had a lot of people across the country auditioning at the time. And it was at the Aloft Hotel.
Okay.
And, I was cooking and I didn't know what to cook. And my sister was like, you need to cook something that you love to cook, but something that we love to eat. Mm-hmm. And so I was really into kind of researching different Japanese inspired foods. And so I did this Japanese flavored pork belly with these pea shoots, this jasmine rice. And I made sauce out the dripping.
You were 19?
18 when I auditioned.
You were 18 when you auditioned, and you threw your your casting recipe was what again?
A Japanese style crispy pork belly.
And you said something pea shoots or something like that.
Oh yeah, it was just literally raw pea shoots, and then I had jasmine rice with it, and it was the drippings from the pork that I turned into a sauce to just go on the bottom.
Hey man, look, I know it's lunchtime if people are watching this, and I haven't yet to eat yet. So this is my 100th restart of getting my body back on track, and I got like 2 ounces of grilled chicken and some raw vegetables over here. I have to eat here in a minute. You talk about pork belly. Okay. All right. So it's your time to go up. You have this recipe. You're like, I'm confident. It's your time to go up. Then what happens?
So the first go around, they had us all in a room, and it was probably 15 people. And they said, you have 3 minutes to plate. They gave us nothing. They said, you have to bring everything. So whatever you use, you have to plate with. So good luck. And they gave us 3 minutes to get our stuff out and plated. So I got my stuff out. I layered my plate up, did everything that I could. And they said, all right, time. And then they sent 3 or 4 judges around from different culinary schools across the country. And they started to go and test our food. Now, you probably already know this, but pork belly is notoriously tough if you don't cook it right. So I'm nervous sitting there because I saw that they had plastic utensils. And I go, no, no, this ain't fair. And so luckily I had scored the skin. And so it had like a nice entry point for them to cut into. And so they come around to me. And I remember the person next to me had like fried rice and a pineapple. And I'm like, I've never seen that before. And so, they were doing their thing. They had their own flair. And I just seemed like I looked down and I looked at myself and like, I seem kind of boring. And so they're asking me questions like, what did you make? How are you doing this? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm just an aspiring 18-year-old cook. I'm really excited. I love food, love Gordon Ramsay, watched all his YouTube videos, learned, I went to Gordon Ramsay University essentially. So I was letting them know like, that's kind of who I am.
Right.
They go to cut into, and I know, those moments on food shows where they're like zooming in on the food and the fork. And, that was happening in real time.
Okay.
And I saw the knife, and then I saw the knife just go into the pork, and the pork just gave way beautifully. And I started smiling. As the judge puts it in his mouth, he starts chewing and he kind of giggles. And that's the same thing I do when I really love what I make. I giggle. And so I said, oh, I don't think I did too bad. And they named, we all had numbers on. And so they named about 5 or 6 numbers. I was one of them. And they told us to move into this next room. And so we go and they say, well, congratulations, guys. You made it to the next round. And I'm like, whew. Okay. And then after that, it was just a bunch of food knowledge testing. Like they said, what this is, know who this is, know what this is. And I just kept going, yeah, that's Emerald Lagasse. That's fennel. That's cucumber. That's hollandaise. That's this and this. And they're like, okay.
So how many rounds was it?
I want to say 5. There were 2 that day. Then I went for an on-camera interview the next day, and they were like, take your glasses on, take your glasses off. what do you like to do? And I was like, well, you know, apart from food, I do impressions and this, that, and whatever. And they had me do a Gordon Ramsay impression on camera. I told them, I said, well, I do, you know, Obama, I do a little bit of Ramsay. And they're like, you have to do the Ramsay. And so we do that. And then they said, okay, well, we'll be in touch. And it's like a longer, it's probably about a 2-month process via email. You have to go and do psych evaluations, blood tests. You know, you have to actually speak with a psychologist as well as do the paper test. And they have you send in videos, like what they usually use in the beginning of auditions, where they see all the family videos. They use that as part of the audition process. And then I found out, I believe it was the day before my 19th birthday, that I was going to go out to California.
Oh, that's a nice birthday gift there.
Yeah.
So we have another question in the chat from Plant People Shop. So if you haven't been to Plant People, it is a Black-owned, woman-owned plant shop in Midtown. Very nice. They do amazing work. But she says, is there a flavor or cuisine style that you always incorporate?
Ooh, yes. And it has shifted in the past 5 years. So about 2.5 years ago, I shifted from having a lot of kind of Japanese influence in a lot of the menus that I make. Now it's a lot of Southern comfort. And so there's always an element of Southern comfort, because I kind of started going back to where my roots were. And a lot of chefs can speak to doing the same thing, where, you know, you want to go out and see the big bad world, but the thing that really feeds your soul is what gave birth to that passion. And for me, that was Southern comfort. So there's always an element of Southern comfort food in any of the menus that I make, or any of the content that I create for social media.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. So, so back to season 8, your first time going around. I think that was season 8. You were 7th in season 8, right? You placed 7th?
7th place.
First time going out. So you flew out to California?
Yeah. And that was my first outing away from family, away from everybody. That was my first, hey, this is grown man status. You have to go out here and learn. Nobody's there to shield you from life. So this is your first outing into life as a grown individual.
Who went with you? You went by yourself?
Yeah, I just went by myself.
Solo dolo on a plane out to Cali. You get there, you compete. What was your first impression of meeting Chef Gordon Ramsay in person? And then what were, in the first competition, what was a impactful takeaway from that experience?
So first time I met Chef Ramsay, my mother and my father actually flew out to surprise me for the audition. So they have a base audition level where they cut it down from 80 people to 40. And then they have the actual videoed auditions from 40 down to 20. And so I was out there, you know, we're sitting in the heat for 5 days ish. And I compete on the second to last day. So I walk into the building and they said, all right, guys, ready, roll film, go. And so we walk in, we're walking down this whole line into the MasterChef kitchen, and they have the 3 judges on seats on the stage. And so I'm already thinking, well, they set up like they're, you know, gods, or, you know, I don't know if you're a comic book fan, but like the Green Lantern Corps where they have all the, it's kind of like that. So I was kind of intimidated already. And they were sitting down. When he stands up, I go, oh my God, this dude's tall as hell, you know, because he's only about an inch or 2 shorter than I am. So it was an immediate intimidation factor, but it was also the click of, hey man, this is the guy that you've looked up to for the past 6-7 years. Act on that. And so for me, I was a combination of nervous and excited, because I knew exactly what I was going to do with my tacos. I didn't know how he was going to react to whatever I said. And luckily enough, you know, they start going down the line talking to people, and he just goes, Roy, yeah, how long have you been in the kitchen? You look like you've been cooking in the kitchen for 10 years. And I'm like, it's like, just for a minute. I told him, I said, I was watching you as a kid, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, Roy, quite a bit older than you. So you couldn't have been seeing me as a kid. Yeah. I'm like, you know what I meant, Chef? I'm watching your videos since I was.
Wait, I just heard how you switched. Like, you do sound like him.
I get that from my dad. We go back and forth on impressions, and it's a thing with us. We're trying to figure out who's better. But
right.
You know, it was one of those things where I was aiming to impress the guy that, you know, I learned a lot from. And as a chef, I tell people all the time, if you want to learn a lot from a chef, watch their hands. It'll tell you a lot more than most of what they're saying. And so from him, you know, when there's chefs that are doing the rapid chopping and stuff, I'd always watch what their hands were doing. And I used to watch his hands on videos. And that's when I picked up a knife and started cutting fast. Okay. So, you know, that was a monumental moment for me, where he is a chef that's trying my food and he's enjoying it and he's enjoying watching me cook and he's seeing all the attention to detail and the due diligence of what I'm doing and the processes I'm going through in my order of operations for these tacos. Yeah. And so for me, yeah, I was very, very nervous, but I was incredibly excited. And I figured, well, you know, Hail Mary, it'll be good, or I'll learn something.
You're right. So you had an opportunity to go back on another season, a few seasons later, and we've seen the video, the moment where, you know, he offers to send you to culinary school, and we see the moment where you definitely look surprised. That's like a game-changing moment for a person.
Absolutely,
it's a life-changing moment for a person. And this young man from Spencer, Oklahoma, that's taken this leap, gets this from, I would say, one of your role models, taking a risk to send you to culinary school. How has that moment changed you, not just as a chef, but how has that moment, that opportunity, impacted you as a person?
So I tell anybody that would listen, I said, you know, I wouldn't have the career I have right now were it not for that singular moment. So just on the career side, that gave birth to my entire career. As a person, it started the clock for me of giving back, right? So as an individual, you know, it was, I'm just trying to live, I'm trying to survive, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. And I've always loved to cook and to, you know, do that as my charitable act. But that's such a monumental act of charity for me was one of the moments where, you know, I was like, I have to find a way to do this for other people, whether it's on a smaller scale or, you know, with more people. I have to find a way to pay this forward, because this gave me an opportunity that absolutely revolutionized what I thought was possible. And so for me, that was the moment that shifted my perspective of, you know, the quote unquote American dream of, you know, we're going to go out, we're going to go get it, we're going to go get it for our own, we're going to do this, and that. It shifted from that to, how do we do this for the next generation coming up? And so it wasn't just about me after that. It was about, you know, the kids that were me at 12, 11, 10, 13, whatever age below, you know, when I really started getting into culinary, those kids with those embers, how do I turn that into a fire that the way it was done for me by my, you know, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt. And then once that grows and once it's honed, how do I give them the opportunity that was given to me by Chef Ramsay in some way? And so it was like a big paradigm shift for me as far as how I looked at, you know, not just my career, but my outlook on life and being more charitable in it.
Shift away from food for just a second. Food consumes you when it's your passion, when it's something that you love to do, something you're called to do. It really does consume you. Away from food, who is Gabriel away from food?
So it's funny that you asked that. That's what I've been spending the past 6 months trying to figure out. I had a therapist on the show. We, you know, talked to the same therapist the first time and the second time. And she told me, she said, Gabe, you gave me the same answers 5 years apart. I feel like that you have given so much to your career that it's taken away from you. So my advice to you, regardless of the show stuff, I want you to go and figure out what makes you happy. And so for me, I rediscovered a love and a passion for poetry. So you know, that's another creative outlet for me, is that I write poetry when I feel inspired, whether it's, you know, questioning, you know, what's going on in life, something more existential, something more free verse, something euphoric or nostalgic. You know, I love spending time with family and friends. We like to go bowling or go shoot some pool, go watch a movie, spend a lot more time with my dog. So we just kind of hang out. He's been ripping and running around here. You know, just things like that, where I'm just kind of going out, exploring nature and reconnecting, grounding a little bit more with the realities of life and just kind of being a little bit more passive and peaceful. Same thing is just kind of investing in my family and my nephews. I've got 3 amazing nephews that one of which is 13 years old. He's kind of seeming like he wants to cook. And so, you know, those things have kind of taken away from, or rather my career is kind of taken away from seeing that those things lie around. And so now it's just about investing in those. That's kind of what, you know, who I am outside of food, is just a family guy that loves, you know, nature, loves spending time with my pup, and honestly just loves to find other creative outlets.
That's awesome. Kind of in a very similar space, excuse me, in a very similar space for me too. It's, you know, you giving, like, wanting to help people, and you got this goal that you're trying to hit, and then you realize, you're like, wait a minute, what did I give back to myself? Like, and it's part of what we do as people. You know, we are brought into this world to be a part of community and to give back to community. But in that, people don't really tell you while you do this purpose life work to pour back into yourself and what that means and rediscover you. And then I'm learning now, it's almost like it's smoothing the rough edges, I guess, is a thing that comes to my head of, you know, when you go fast out the gate and now you get to that place where I feel like I'm coasting. Not any less of ambition, but I'm like, okay, I'm giving myself back. Because if I don't give myself back something, if I don't discover me as the person, I'm going to get lost into this thing and I may not enjoy it anymore. So if there was something that you like, what's your thing that you like to eat? It's not fancy, something that people probably would not expect, that you feed yourself, that people wouldn't expect. What would you pick?
Oh, you know what? That is a easy tie between just honestly hole in the wall Chinese, really, really greasy lo mein. Like that's a go-to for me. But in the past year, it's just been a goosey and fufu. Like that's been my go-to. Yeah. And so Mama Z's, I've ordered that probably 2 or 3 times a month. Like that's real simple, easy go-to. And I kept telling my family, like, listen, I don't think y'all understand. I don't think y'all understand. You understand a lot more about Southern comfort and soul food when you go back to, you know, like the African food. Like there's so much you can see where the deviation is, and you can see where the similarities are, and it's insane. And so the first time I tried it, I was invited over to a friend's house and like, hey, we're doing like an African celebration, which seemed a little odd because everybody was pretty much white. So I was like, this is interesting, but I love it because, you know, that means that you guys are opening your eyes to other cultures. And that to me signifies progress, however you want to look at it.
Right.
And so I said, absolutely, I'll go. You know, I haven't had much experience with African food. I haven't eaten very much. So by all means. And I could not stop smiling.
Yeah.
This is the food. To me, this is what food should do. It should create a memory that makes you smile. So anytime you try that one bite again, it brings that smile back to your face.
Yep.
And so that's been it for me. Those 2 things have been just pretty much on reorder.
So it's kind of the same thing for me. Like I've been going pretty crazy with African cuisine. So definitely you cannot come to Oklahoma City and not, in terms of African food restaurants, Mama Z's is at the top. And I'm glad. I hate the fact that I just said that. So there's Mama Z's because I'm friends with, like, I enjoy so many different restaurants. Mama Z's, and you have Taste of Africa. So Mama Z's Nigerian, Taste of Africa's Kenyan, and now you have Jola's in Edmond, which is also Nigerian. But it's almost like you can tell that there are different tribes. There are different parts of Nigeria. You taste the difference in flavors. Then found out today, there's another restaurant. It's called Blended Love Nigerian and Creole Cuisine. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
I think they opened last month, and they're off, they're on 1201 Southeastern. And I believe right now that in Oklahoma City, that our African restaurants are hands down putting some whoopings on restaurants in Oklahoma City in terms of how hard they're working to get their restaurants out, having restaurants and food trucks and catering, and the support and passion getting. And you said something very important on what food does to bring people together. Our food scene is diverse in Oklahoma City, which I enjoy, and the work that we do is to bring more attention on the diversity of African and African flavors. And there's a difference between African American cuisine and African cuisine. There's a lot of difference. So people should no longer be surprised on when a Black chef has all of this talent, because so much comes out of Africa anyway.
Oh yeah.
So All right. So as I'm starting to wind down this conversation, because a lot of things I could talk about, more questions I have, and we'll get to those later. But as I mentioned to you offline, so you have this recipe that you did for ranch dressing. And I was like, all right, he did this ranch dressing. Let me try it, see something different. Every once in a while, I get to these moods where I want to experiment. I'm not afraid of the kitchen. So I was like, let me make this ranch dressing. I said, but I want to make it vegan or dairy-free. So in your recipe, and it was really simple. The ingredients were very, very simple to make your own dressing.
Mm-hmm.
You had buttermilk. Y'all go to his Instagram. You'll see it on there too. It's like buttermilk, parsley. You had some salt, some other stuff in there. What else was in there? You had sour cream and
just like some green onion tops and
yeah. So then I substituted that instead of using mayonnaise. I used vegan mayonnaise. I didn't use buttermilk. I substituted oat milk and lemon juice for my buttermilk, which I was scared out of my pants because I didn't know how that was going to taste. And then all the other stuff. So I made my own ranch dressing. I got my own right here. And I'm going to bottle this. I'm not going to sell it yet. But if y'all see this out in the streets, OKC Black Keys Ranch, y'all get it on the shelves. But when I did it, this is what it reminded me of. I read the back of the ingredients of ranch dressing. There was all this stuff in there that these words I really couldn't pronounce. And it made me nervous because I was like, well, I was comparing what I made to what I buy in the bottle. But then I realized this is how it's supposed to taste. It's real food. You made it with real food, not all these additives. So when you, probably like the second to the last question, when you're traveling around and finding different recipes and different spices and seasonings, does that help you with your creativity and deciding like how I'm going to make this food taste like real food and not a bunch of additives?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I love to do with travel is it gives me inspiration. If I don't travel, if I don't read, I fall into a rut, creatively, I fall into a rut just in my food in general, because I pretty much feel like I'm walking in a circle of what I make and what I can cook. And then, one of my big things is if there wasn't a way to go buy it at the store, would I know how to make it? And if I have that answer that's no, then I learn how to make it. So, a lot of you touched on something really important in regards to what's on the back of the food label and the difference in taste from fresh to store or shelf stable. A lot of the stuff that's shelf stable, you're tasting the chemical with a couple of, flavors that's throwing on top to mask it, as opposed to the whole rich vibrancy that it's supposed to have in its actual form. Even something as simple as a tomato sauce can taste wildly different, and that's probably one of the best shelf stable products is a good tomato sauce, but you could still do better. And so, I do a lot of that kind of, how do we make this barbecue sauce? How are we supposed to do this where it doesn't have a bunch of corn syrup in it? How it doesn't, even if we use sugar, it's still sugar instead of just, how do we have, not have all these preservatives in this, that, or the other. It's wildly important to me to be able to know how to do that, because as a chef, if you're so used to the shelf stable or the preserved version, you're not going to know how to play with the nuances of what it's supposed to be. And so I want to be able to create from scratch. And that's a big thing for me is be able to create and take the bounties of nature and turn it into something that's robust and flavorful. And so, yeah, a lot of the time, if I'm going somewhere and I'm like, man, this is really good mustard, and they're like, yeah, we make it in house, the immediate thought is, I'm gonna make it. Like it's not even oh man, I should ask them like how long did nope, I don't care. It took 2 days, took a week. That's one thing I taught myself, like how to make kimchi. That's remarkably simple, and it's wildly different, and it's drastically different depending on how you ferment it, how you age it, what you spice it with. And so I look at the bare bones of it. For example, that ranch, it's like, okay, it's a combination of 2 or 3 dairy products with a lot of herbs and granulated spices and seasonings. So I said, okay, well, let me just figure out the ratio so I can get the thickness, the consistency that I want, and the flavors that's robust enough to not overtake whatever I put it on, but complement it. And so that's kind of what I did. It was a lot of trial and error, and I always have this notepad next to me. So I'll write down all the ingredients, my fundamental basic measurements are going, okay, this, and this. And if it's kind of off, then I'll add something and I'll write it down, plus 1/4 cup, plus a tablespoon. And then when I get what I want, circle it, get a new page, write it all down, try it again, and then adapt it again if I need to. But if it's perfect, then boom, we have a new recipe.
And it's actually what I realized, it's actually cheaper to make it than to buy it.
Yeah.
Now this is a full circle moment. What you mentioned taking things that you have and making them. You know what I'm about to say?
Probably.
So you see, going back to your family unit, and getting a chance to watch mom, aunt, grandma making miracles from what they had, and it tastes great. Didn't have a lot of extra money to go grocery shopping anyway. I don't remember growing up. I don't remember going to the grocery store growing up as much as I do now.
Yeah.
Taking what you have and creating something amazing with it. My uncle makes this barbecue sauce. He will not tell me. And I'm like, I don't see the seasonings. I know this one has a vinegar taste to it. That one has, where is it? He won't tell me. But then to hear you talk about getting things down to the foundation of it, and how food can taste good with fewer ingredients, which is in contrast to the conversations now about food apartheid and food insecurity and food deserts, that eating organic and having fresh quality foods, which is expensive, versus teaching people you can get so much abundance by looking at what you have.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are in a society that wants us to go buy more. But we often forget, if you look at what's in front of you, of what you have right here, what can you make with what you have? And then be able to share that with your community, with your family, your friends, and people. So that's one of the beautiful things I love about food, man. It's the dining together, the creating, is the innovation and community and care that comes with it.
Oh, absolutely.
So last question for you. If you were to sit across from a young person that wasn't exactly sure if they wanted to be a chef or not, but they love cooking, they love food.
Mm-hmm.
With the experiences that you have, what would you tell that person?
That is funny because that advice changes as I change, right? The more I learn, the more I tailor it. So I used to tell younger people, like, hey, don't give up. Just be tenacious. Just don't give up. And that was kind of the foundation of any information I gave them. And I still hold that to be true. But I tell people now, it comes to what kind of life you want to live. If you're willing to take a little bit of the fun of, going out partying or going out to this, going out to that, or, whatever, and you're willing to take that energy and put it into your craft, you'd be surprised at what you come out with. So I tell people all the time, like, this is a very demanding career. It takes a lot of your mind, your body, your soul, definitely blood, sweat, and tears in the literal sense. So I tell people, like, if you are willing to bleed for this career, it'll reward you. It just make sure you understand that it is very challenging. And if you're a person that loves to take a challenge, don't back down from anything that this career throws at you. I tell people all the time, I think right now it's 5 or 6% of my body is burn scars, right? So, I have at 20 going on 26 already sustained a lot of impact on my body. And so I tell people, this is a demanding career, but just make sure that you let your passion carry you through and understand that it's not just one path anymore. I spoke with a food writer, and he told me, he's like, dude, what you decided to do with your career is vastly different than the normal trajectory of, just going in the restaurant and working 52, 63 hours a week and this, that, and the other. He's like, you decided to take it private and cultivate food culture and taking it back to what restaurants were, which is, people hosting in their homes, dining, feeding people, and letting them build memories. That's the foundation of those restaurants is those people's homes, opening them up to random people and having them come in and eat. And so he's like, you're taking it back to that while maintaining the perfectionism of a restaurant or a plated meal. And I just tell people all the time now, with social media, with private dining, with pop-ups, with food trucks, you have so many avenues. So don't be intimidated by one, but just find the one that you like, go for it. And if there's people that can lead you in that area, follow them, ask them questions, always ask questions. You're never too smart to ask a question.
Absolutely.
And even if you know that information, it will always change or grow. So just make sure that you're checking back and double checking. It's like a mechanic when they say check, triple, double, or triple check your work, double and triple check your knowledge.
Yep. It's in a state of always learning. Well, Chef Gabe, I appreciate you giving me your time on this day. I'm pretty sure you had a lot of other things to do and giving some time for episode 4 of the Bigger Than Food podcast. For those watching, I put his website down below. You'll see it down in this video, and we'll also put some information later on in the other content that we'll create. I enjoyed this conversation. A lot of different things I didn't know. I was very to hear the balance. To hear the background of the influence of the women in your family, and then the influence of your dad and his entrepreneurship efforts, and hear you talk about your siblings. It really paints a good picture of where you are today, and I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm very excited about connecting with you more offline on how we can support you and elevate you, so people know that you are a dynamic chef here in Oklahoma and living here in Oklahoma City. So thank you for joining us for episode 4 of the Bigger Than Food podcast. If y'all have not seen this, watch the full episode. You can definitely catch the replay on YouTube and Facebook. Please share this and follow Chef Gabe online on Instagram, Facebook, website. You need a private chef. You want to cook with Gabe. You need some tutor out. Look, go to his website. Everything you need to know is on there. So, Chef,
or if you need a book in the next month, I didn't even get to tell you. That's
tell me quickly about your book, man.
Yeah, that all of that conversation culminates in that book. So the book is called "We Got Food at Home: A Guide to Great Home Cooking," and so it just brings it back home. It's recipes that I learned growing up, recipes that I cultivated on MasterChef, and recipes in my private chef life. So it's all of that broken down 10 steps or less, and most everything in the book you can get at your local grocery store. So just kind of
a hard copy book too, right?
Yep.
Okay, just make sure I want my signed one though.
I got you.
Signed autographs, so I can put it on the shelf, man. I can put it on the shelf. I definitely got my pre-order in, so I'm looking forward to support you, man. Hey, thank you for joining us on episode 4 of the Bigger Than Food podcast. Definitely love all that you're doing, and we definitely will be supporting you going forward.
Definitely appreciate it and had a great time.
All right, man. Have a good one.
You as well.
All right, y'all. That is episode 4 of the Bigger Than Food podcast. I enjoyed that, man. It's always refreshing to see people work really hard. And I love talking with Black chefs and supporting and promoting them. So make sure you're also supporting Chef Gabe. You can follow him online, Facebook, Instagram. He's doing great work. And he does a great job on his social media of showing you how to make these recipes. So we're about to get out of here, y'all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Watch the replay. Share them with your family and friends. And this is what you can do to help us as we grow this podcast. Go to YouTube and follow us on YouTube. Subscribe and give us a comment on YouTube, so that way we can continue building up our show online and to continue doing our thing. So we'll get on out of here, and we'll see you next Thursday with our next guest on the Bigger Than Food podcast.